Hello, and welcome to Encouraging Leadership, conversations that mobilize today's women leaders, with your host, Ann Miner. Meet leaders who share their observations, knowledge, insight, and perspectives to mobilize you to apply your own leadership in business and in life. Here's your host, Ann Miner.
Today I have with me Angela Mondou, President of ICE Leadership and author of Hit the Ground Leading. Angela, welcome.
Thank you, Anne. I'm thrilled to be here.
And I'm so happy to be able to have a conversation with you about what led up to you authoring Hit the Ground Leading.
So, Anne, I'm not sure how many authors you've interviewed in the past, but writing a book is not always a black and white decision. For me, it was definitely a journey that kind of appeared. I had a background of serving in the Air Force / military, Canadian Armed Forces, for 9 years, and then got into the high-tech industry. So I had a really diverse leadership background that became a big part of my role in the civilian world, the business world, and I got asked often as a female leader as well. My teams in both the military and in some senior marketing positions in business were fairly large teams. So I got asked to speak often on leadership, providing insight, a unique insight with my interesting leadership background. Hence, your speeches end up becoming components of chapters. So that was kind of the beginning. And along the way, you get introduced to really interesting people that say, gee, you should really look at writing a book, which is really kind of how seeds were planted with me, and then someone that really felt I should introduce me to David Chilton, who comes from the Kitchener-Waterloo area where I was at the time working at Research in Motion. So in a long story short, that's how the journey began.
Well, tell us about David Chilton. So who is he?
So the wealthy barber author, phenomenally successful, most successful self-published Canadian author, I believe, with probably over 100,000 books sold. And then he became a big behind-the-scenes leader with the Looney Spoons books, the cookbooks, helping those sisters launch their self-published books. So I was introduced to him. I had a big marketing background at the time at Research in Motion, so some good knowledge about understanding product launching in different channels of distribution. So he was pretty bullish on me self-publishing and managing my own sales of my book and leveraging the speaking that I was doing to help support that as part of my journey. So I think he was really pivotal in terms of the decision to self-publish versus publish with a book company. And I actually did have a book company really interested in publishing my book. Very different paths, though.
Yes, they are, aren't they? And of course, when you self-publish, you retain all the rights. Yeah. Which, if you go with a publishing company, you don't necessarily. And I've also heard that when you go with a publishing company, there's an expectation that you will commit to speaking maybe as often as once a week.
Well, if that's the case, that might not be a bad thing if it's moving your books and they're managing all of that process for you and you have the time to do that. But it is a big campaign, right, when you launch a book, and you certainly are on a bit of a book tour. Very different choices, very different levels of involvement, as you're suggesting, in one path or the other. But either one can be, help an author be particularly successful. Mine was so what happened with my choice to self-publish, which then you're the one that determines your sales strategy, your marketing plans, your speaking engagements. So you have all of that accountability of basically running a consulting kind of role. And in my case, it became a company, and I had employees on my team. The book was one of my product lines that supported my speaking, which expanded into workshops, which also was supported by consulting around strategic marketing and leadership, and helping companies in different industry sectors design their own sales and marketing strategies. So it's kind of an interesting process.
Mm-hmm. So maybe you would share with us some of the wisdom that you wove into your book about your leadership journey and your philosophies.
Sure. And so there's a couple of chapters in there that I think were kind of perhaps epiphanies to, when you write a book, you can't help but start understanding yourself a lot more. I think that's part of the interesting process that helps with that. So there's one chapter that is really, I think, really represents who I am as an individual and the kinds of projects or roles I've taken on, is the chapter called Pushing the Envelope. And when I do a lot of public speaking, it really does focus on that expression. And I don't know if I've ever given you the history of what Pushing the Envelope is all about, but it is an Air Force expression, aviation expression, and I always like to say most of the good ones come from flying, not from golf.
Yes.
It does refer to when you're flying experimental jets, for instance, before airplanes are actually allowed to fly with passengers in them or fighter pilots, or they have to be tested. So there's these special pilots called test pilots that take these jets and fly them at their maximum safe limits of operating performance. So there's these mathematical equations that kind of indicate that anything beyond that and the airplane might start falling apart. So we should kind of apply that in your world. Generally what happens when we operate in this space where we're in our maximum safe limits of performance, that's the area where you're really growing. You don't know all the answers. You're facing some fear in your choices or the path that you're going down, but you also don't come back the same person as you get through those projects that put you in those positions where you push the envelope. So that kind of, to me, is a pivotal anchor. I think that's the twice that I've been speaking with you using that word, and I've said it wrong. That's funny. It's an anchor in the book because it is how I live my life. In fact, I had one of my leaders on my team last week say to me, "Oh my God, I would have never looked at questioning how we're doing our financials the way you do. You push the envelope." I said, Well, yeah. I said, you know that about me, don't you? I said, that's kind of my job, right, to color outside the line. So that's one thing that's key. The other theme that threads throughout the book is, and it's kind of the subtitle, right, which is seize your potential and do incredible things. And I really do think that my life and my choices for my career have been a lot more based on seeking adventure than seeking financial gain, for instance. So when I got out of business school and I had job offers with General Electric and banks as a management trainee, I chose to go join the Air Force and look at becoming a pilot and getting into the field that I did in the Air Force, because it felt adventurous and to me indicated global travel and these kinds of things I valued, which was excitement and travel and stuff like that. So a lot of the chapters and the key theme is around how do you find what your adventure is and how do you understand your principles and the action that you're going to take around that so that you drive your own adventure.
Right.
So, long answer to your question?
No, that was a great answer because it leads us to my next question, which is about establishing your individual values. And certainly you've articulated yours. Now, one of the exercises I think you do when you're doing a workshop is having people identify and articulate their own core values so they can laser focus on that. How do you get people to do that? Maybe you could give us a couple of the steps along the path to identifying your own values.
how you do that. So I actually have one of the chapters that's called Lead Yourself First. And it's not easy to do that. Like getting to know yourself and your inner values sometimes takes you working in an organization, working with a culture, working with a leader that is totally against your values. And then all of a sudden it becomes really clear, I don't like this. This doesn't feel good. But in that chapter I talk about a couple of things. And it is like, do you have, certain principles that you operate by? Mine was definitely, I've always wanted jobs that offer adventure. And to me, I defined adventure in travel and living in different countries, probably because I was brought up as an Air Force kid, moved a lot, and lived in different countries. So it's kind of part of my DNA. The values and then the third piece to the principles and understanding your values, I think, is your willingness to take action, because it's kind of tough to drive your own direction and seize your potential if you're not ready to take those steps. So understanding the need to take action and be accountable, those are the kind of what I call the fundamental keystones of being able to shape your direction in your future. I do talk in there about different tools. So there's experiences that obviously help you learn about your values, and I look back and I think the biggest learnings I've had about some of my values have been when I worked for terrible bosses. Have you ever worked for a terrible boss?
Oh, yes. I certainly have. I think I know exactly what you mean. You learned what not to do.
You learn what not to do. You learn how painful working for someone that doesn't see things or have the same values that you do, how difficult that can be for you to go to that job. It really rubs against the core of who you are. So that I found there's a couple times in my life, not often, thank goodness, I've worked for two people, one early on and one much later. Very difficult experiences, very eye-opening to what I believed in and what I valued in my day, my work, and my life. So I do talk about experiences. I talk about some interesting personality testing that you can do as well. And, I'm sure maybe some of the listeners have heard of Myers-Briggs or done Myers-Briggs, or another really interesting program I did at Queen's University in the Strategic Leadership Program was called the Herman Brain Dominance. It was a psychological personality assessment as well from a leadership perspective. So there's a lot of really neat tools that you can use out there as well to help you get in tune with yourself, your values, your skills, your leadership nature.
Mm-hmm. Yes, DISC and social styles, and there are quite a number of them. They can be applied slightly differently, but you're right. Often they are sort of the catalyst for you seeing yourself potentially in a new way. So I completely agree with utilizing those tools.
Yeah. So that's a good way to start, I think, gaining the experiences that are going to test you a little bit. There's a quote that I love from, of course it happens to be, not of course, but military leader, I think it was one of the Joint Chiefs of Staff in the States, and he says that the jobs where he didn't ever feel comfortable are the best jobs, because those are the ones where you're learning and growing. The jobs where you know exactly what you're doing are kind of keeping you in status quo.
Exactly. And, I think that one of the critical things for people to understand is that as a leader, you need to be able to make mistakes yourself and be a role model for taking the risk and learning from the mistake. So not pretending that you're some kind of perfect creature that doesn't ever slip off track or make a misstep, but rather that you model the behavior you want from others. Yeah.
I agree with that a lot. That I think leadership, people will say, well, what is leadership all about? To me, it very much is being the individual that is willing to trailblaze. So going into a space where the answer doesn't exist yet, whether that's defining a new program for a company, leading a project to launch a new product, opening the doors with new clients, whatever that is, it's something new. There aren't processes yet. You got to figure it out, and you're the one that's going to start helping develop that path. So it's really trailblazing, opening new doors for yourself or your organization. And that kind of ties back into what you were just saying, I think, where you will, because you're virtually doing something that is brand new, untested, answers don't exist yet, you're going to make mistakes, and you're going to be forced to make decisions where you don't have all the information. And to me, and then being willing to be accountable to make those mistakes, all of that is what I call leadership. Accountability, being willing to take on the potential mistake or the potential failure really sets apart what I call, what I think leaders are all about versus people who aren't quite that willing to take on that risk.
Mm-hmm. So if you had to say what your leadership philosophy is, we know that taking risks and trailblazing, going where no one has been before is part of what drives you. What is your philosophy, though, as a leader when it comes to the people that you're working with?
Mm-hmm. So I think one of the key ones, and then maybe it summarizes what you just said, is really about the willingness to take action and be accountable. My philosophy beyond that when it comes to leading the team is enabling accountability on the team, setting your team members up as well to also be accountable. I think it's kind of a critical skill almost, if you will, these days, because a lot of teams are small, agile, lean, doing a ton. You can't have teams moving like that at the speed we need to in business these days unless they have, clear lines of accountability and a willingness to be accountable. So my philosophy around that is supporting them so that they feel safe to be accountable, because what stops a lot of people from decision making and taking on their level of risk is feeling like they're going to get knocked over if they do something wrong. So it's an art. It's all balancing all of the needs of the team and the speed you got to move in, helping your team be accountable, make the decisions so that you can do other things, a lot more things, not be a bottleneck.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think probably the last one is just so simple, and it really is. I think it's being fair, but also being firm. I believe with my small team now, this is probably one of the smaller teams I've led. There's 8 of us. We're all equal. I don't personally have a need for, my philosophy is I don't feel that I am better than anybody, nor is anybody than me. So we're all very equal on the team, regardless of our level of experience. We've got young people on the team out of university and a lot more senior people out of the team, colonels from the military, and on our small team, quite diverse. All of us have very important roles, all of us, and all of us use and leverage each other's skills and resources continually. So I think creating an environment where there is that value and people have a clarity around the value they're adding to the overall team is really, really important.
So it sounds like within your team you have a very high level of trust of one another.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you know one another very well. Certainly, if you're on a team where you don't really know what other people can do or capable of doing or have experience at, it's difficult to leverage everybody's strengths.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And because it's funny, because we are a national charity, we have a very high profile in terms of the people that we deal with, senior defense leaders, senior business leaders, and we're just a small little team, and we've got to deliver pretty high-end programming, or at least that's what's happened since I've started leading it. I feel like we should be doing that. So we are at the point now where we're very matrix managed. I have 4 people on the team who are involved with everything from managing parts of our projects to helping with the logistics to helping with graphic design and marketing. All of those people are involved with the 6 projects we have on the go right now. So pulling the team together continually and having clarity around who's owning what part of each of these projects is becoming really important to the success of what we're doing too. So I think that's kind of reality with today's leadership. It's a really good point that we're talking about because it's very different than where I was 30 and 20 years ago.
Well, I think we probably both came from a background of command and control.
Yeah. I came from the day of no computer and I had a secretary. I kind of miss those days.
Well, that's a conversation for another day, hey?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you mentioned that leadership is an art, and I think that's certainly reflective of what we're hearing and what we're finding. Now, you also are working on a special project leading Canada Company. Now, maybe you would tell our listeners, are there differences about the way you lead Canada Company than the ICE leadership team?
I would say no now but there are, and that's because ICE leadership and my team, that was within this decade where I was running strategic consulting programs and now full-time running the Canada Company team and this amazing charity. This last decade for me has been very much about a smaller team of less than 10 people doing big amounts of big things, big workshops and programs for companies or big events for senior leaders. So I'd say no. I think it comes down to having the flexibility to leverage the skill sets on your team, growing and delegating. This is where that delegation and accountability becomes really important because you can't be a bottleneck in a small team as a leader. And quite frankly, I can't get out there and do new and innovative things or develop new and innovative programs if I'm back in the office having to make all the decisions. So it's the same now. It's different possibly than 20 years ago. For me, I had a lot larger teams. We didn't have the speed and pace of business quite where we are now, or maybe that was 25 years ago. But we're at a time now where I just think speed is driving the communications, the pace that business moves at. That is driving very much how business and teams are managed and the way we have to communicate and work together.
Yes, and if only we could all read one another's minds, I think we would have it absolutely perfected, huh?
Yeah, that would be helpful because, and we're getting there with the continual texting. It's only one step away from that. We're not speaking anymore. We're texting and emailing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So listen, Angela, we were talking about your book, Hit the Ground Leading, and I'm sure that my listeners would love to know how they could get their own copy. I remember you saying that usually you use it in your workshops and with your speaking engagements, but in case somebody would like to get their hands on an individual copy, is it all right with you if we give them your email and they can contact you that way?
Absolutely. Please do that. So that's definitely an avenue to reach me for sure.
All right. So listeners, that email address is angela@iceleadership.com, and I'm going to spell it for you. AngelaAt@iceleadership.com. Angela@iceleadership.com. And she'll make sure that you make arrangements to get a copy of her book or multiple copies winging their way to you. And you did hear that Angela is sought-after public speaker. So if you're thinking about events where you're wanting to have somebody represent leadership and their perspective and provide guidance, Angela Mondou would be a great addition to your lineup.
And you should know because you've seen me recently.
I have. I absolutely have. So, Angela, we're just going to wrap up here in a minute or so. I'm wondering if you have one thought you would like to leave our audience with today.
Well, I have so many thoughts, but I will try and contain it to one. I really do think, in fact, I was just talking to my son the other day about, he said, wow, Mom, my life is really coming together. He's at university in Montreal right now, found a great apartment, got a great job. And I said, well, you've really been setting your intentions and, putting it out there, taking action towards having these things happen that you want to happen. And you're making it happen. And I do believe that, and certainly that's a number of those messages, as I said, if there are things out there that you really want to do from a career perspective, a leadership perspective, a personal perspective, if you can start understanding, those kind of triggers, that talking about what you want to do, setting those intentions, and that will lead to you starting to take action, which then helps you kind of seize those incredible things that you're going to be able to do. I believe in that. That's why I wrote about it.
Absolutely. We do know that thoughts can become things, and that writing it down is maybe the first step to bringing it to reality. And we all need to guard what we say out loud and what we think and what we say to ourselves internally. So that internal voice needs to be honed so it's constantly focused on the vision you have for yourself. Not doubtful, but always optimistic.
Yes, and I find that by the time you start writing it and saying it, that's the difference between shifting from doubt to becoming that optimistic, confident place where you are now declaring. So that's a really good point. 100%.
All right. Well, thank you so much. Sorry, Angela, didn't mean to cut you off. Was there something else you want to say?
No, that was great. I just want to thank you for the opportunity.
Well, I'm so glad that you were available to speak to us today, and I so appreciate you sharing your perspectives on leadership, and I hope it leads to more leadership speaking opportunities and sales of your book. Hit the ground leading.
That's great. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Encouraging Leadership. To learn more about our host, Ann Miner, and the Acacia Institute, please visit acaciainstitute.com. Join us next week at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, for more Encouraging Leadership. In the meantime, be courageous.